CHAPTER XV of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 4, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The boats. During the night, the appearance of the isle inhabited by the Martial family was very gloomy, but by the bright light of day nothing could be more smiling than this accursed spot. Bordered by willows and poplars, almost entirely covered with thick grass, in which wound several paths of yellow sand, the islet included a kitchen garden and a good number of fruit trees. In the midst of the orchard was to be seen the hovel with the thatched roof, into which Martial had expressed his intention to retire with François and Amandine. On this side the isle terminated at its point by a kind of stockade, formed of large piles, driven in to prevent the soil from wearing away. In front of the house, and almost touching the landing place, was a small arbour of green trellis work, intended to support in summer time the creeping shoots of the young vines and hops, a cradle of verdure, beneath which were arranged tables for the visitors. At one end of the house, painted white and covered with tiles, a wood house, with a loft over it, formed at the angle a small wing, much lower than the main body of the building. Almost precisely over this wing there appeared a window, with the shutters covered with iron plates, and strengthened without by two transverse iron bars attached to the wall by strong clamps. 3 boats were undulating in the water, fastened to posts at the landing place. Seated in one of these boats, Nicholas was making sure that the valve he had introduced performed its part properly. Standing on a bench at the mouth of the arbour, Calabash, with her hands placed over her eyes so as to shade away the sun, was looking out in the direction in which Madame Séraphin and Fleur de Marie were to come to reach the isle. "I don't see any one yet, old or young," said Calabash, getting off the bench and speaking to Nicholas. "It will be just as it was yesterday. We may as well wait for the King of Prussia. If these women do not come in half an hour, we can't wait any longer. Bras Rouge's dodge is much better, and he'll be waiting for us. The diamond matcher is to be at his place in the Champs Elysées at 5 o'clock. We ought to be there before her. The Chouette said so this morning." "You are right," replied Nicholas, leaving the boat. "May thunder smite the old devil's skin, who has given us all the trouble for nothing. The valve works capitally. It appears we shall only have one instead of 2 jobs. Besides, Bras Rouge and Barbillon will want us. They can do nothing by their 2 selves." "True again; for whilst the job is doing, Bras Rouge must keep watch outside the cabaret, and Barbillon is not strong enough to drag the matcher into the cellar, for the old will fight for it, I know." "Didn't the Chouette say that for a joke she had got the Schoolmaster at school in the cellar?" "Not in this one, in another much deeper, and which is filled with water at spring tides." "How the Schoolmaster must rage and foam there in the cellar! They're all alone, and blind, too." "That is no matter, for if he saw as clear as ever, he could see nothing there. The cellar is as dark as an oven." "Still, when he has done singing all the songs he knows, to pass away the time, his days must hang precious heavy on his hands." "The Chouette says that he amuses himself with rat hunting, and that the cellar is full of game." "I say, Nicholas, talking of certain persons who must be tired, and fume and fret," remarked Calabash, with a savage smile, and pointing to the window fastened up with the iron plates, "there is one there who must be ready to devour his own flesh and blood." "Bah! He's asleep. Since the morning he hasn't stirred, and his dog is silent." "Perhaps he has strangled him for food. For 2 days they must both be desperate hungry and thirsty up there together." "That is their affair. Martial may still last a long time in this way, if it amuses him. When it is done, why, we shall say he died of his complaint, and there'll be an end of that affair." "Do you think so?" "Of course I do. As mother went to Asnières this morning, she met Père Férot, the fisherman, and as he was very much astonished at not having seen his friend Martial for the last 2 days, mother told him that Martial was confined to his bed, and was so ill that his life was despaired of. Daddy Férot swallowed all like so much honey. He'll tell everybody else, and when the thing's done and over, why, it'll all seem natural enough." "Yes, but he won't die directly. This way is a tedious one." "What else is to be done? There was no way of doing otherwise. That devil of a Martial, when he's put up, is as full of mischief as the old one himself, and as strong as a bull. Particularly when he suspects anything, it is dangerous to approach him. But now his door is well nailed up on the outside, what can he do? His window is strongly fastened with iron, too. Why, he might have driven out the bars by cutting away the plaster with his knife, and he would have done it, only I got up the ladder, and chopped at his fingers with a bill hook every time he tried to go to work." "What a pleasant watch!" said the ruffian, with a chuckle. "It must have been vastly amusing." "Why, it was to give you time to come with the iron plates you went to get from Père Micou." "What a rage the dear brother must have been in!" "He ground his teeth like a lunatic. 2 or 3 times he tried to drive me away from the iron bars with his stick, but then, as he had only one hand at liberty, he could not work and release the iron bars, which was what he was trying at. Fortunately there's no fireplace in his room, and the door is solid, and his hands finely cut. If not, he would work his way through the floor." "What, through those heavy beams? No, no, there's no chance of his escaping. The shutters are covered with iron plates, and strengthened with 2 bars of iron. The door is nailed up outside with large boat nails 3 inches long. His coffin is more solid than if it were made of oak and lead." "I say, though, when La Louve comes out of prison, and makes her way here to see her man, as she calls him—" "Well, we shall say, 'Look for him.' By the way, do you know that, if mother had not shut up those young rips of children, they would have gnawed their ways through the door like young rats to free Martial? That little vagabond François is quite furious since he suspects we have packed away his tall brother." "But, you know, they mustn't be left in the room up stairs whilst we leave the island. The window is not barred, and they have only to drop down outside." At this moment the attention of Nicholas and Calabash was attracted by the sound of cries and sobs which came from the house. They saw the door of the ground floor, which had been open until then, close violently, and a minute afterwards the pale and sinister countenance of Mère Martial appeared through the bars of the kitchen window. With her long, lean arm, the culprit's widow made a sign to her children to come to her. "There's a row, I know. I'll bet that it is François who is giving himself some airs again," said Nicholas. "That beggar Martial! But for him this young scamp would be by himself. You keep a good look-out, and if you see the 2 women coming, give me a call." Whilst Calabash again mounted the bench, and looked out for the arrival of Séraphin and the Goualeuse, Nicholas entered the house. Little Amandine was on her knees in the centre of the kitchen, sobbing and asking pardon for her brother François. Enraged and threatened, the lad, ensconced in one of the angles of the apartment, had Nicholas's hatchet in his hand, and appeared determined this time to offer the most desperate resistance to his mother's wishes. Impassive as usual, showing Nicholas the cellar, the widow made a sign to her son to shut François up there. "I will never be shut up there!" cried the boy, in a determined tone. "You want to make us die of hunger, like Brother Martial." The widow looked at Nicholas with an impatient air, as if to reproach him for not instantly executing her commands, as, with another imperious gesture, she pointed to François. Seeing his brother advance towards him, the young boy brandished the axe with a desperate air, and cried: "If you try to shut me up there, whether it is mother, brother, or Calabash, so much the worse. I shall strike, and the hatchet cuts." Nicholas felt, as the widow did, the pressing necessity there was to prevent the 2 children from going to Martial's succour, whilst the house was left to itself, as well as to put them out of the way of seeing the scenes which were about to pass, for their window looked on to the river in which they were about to drown Fleur de Marie. But Nicholas was as cowardly as he was ferocious, and, afraid of receiving a blow from the dangerous hatchet with which his young brother was armed, hesitated to approach him. The widow, angry at his hesitation, pushed him towards François; but Nicholas, again retreating, exclaimed: "But, mother, if he cuts me? You know I want all my arms and fingers at this time, and I feel still the thump that brute Martial gave me." The widow shrugged her shoulders, and advanced towards François. "Don't come near me, mother!" shrieked the boy, in a fury, "or you'll pay dear for all the beatings you have given me and Amandine." "Let him shut us up! Don't strike, mother!" cried Amandine, in fear. At this moment Nicholas saw upon a chair a large blanket, which he used to wrap his booty in at times, and, taking hold of it, and partly unfolding it, he threw it completely over François's head, who, in spite of his efforts, finding himself entangled under its folds, could not make use of his weapon. Nicholas then seized hold of him, and, with his mother's help, carried him into the cellar. Amandine had continued kneeling in the centre of the kitchen, and as soon as she saw her brother overcome, she sprang up, and in spite of her fright, went to join him in the dark hole. The door was then double locked on the brother and sister. "It will still be that infernal Martial's fault if these children behave in this outrageous manner to us," said Nicholas. "Nothing has been heard in his room since this morning," said the widow, with a pensive air, and she shuddered. "Nothing." "That's a sign, mother, that you were right to say to Père Férot, the fisherman at Asnières, that Martial had been so dangerously ill as to be confined to his bed for the last 2 days; for now, when all is known, it will not astonish anybody." After a moment's silence, and if she wished to escape a painful thought, the widow replied suddenly, "Didn't the Chouette come here whilst I was at Asnières?" "Yes, mother." "Why didn't she stay and accompany us to Bras Rouge's? I mistrust her." "Bah! You mistrust everybody, mother. You are always fancying they are going to play you some trick. To day it is the Chouette; yesterday it was Bras Rouge. Bras Rouge is at liberty, my son is at Toulon, yet they committed the same robbery." "You are always saying this. Bras Rouge escaped because he is as cunning as a fox, that's it. The Chouette did not stay, because she had an appointment at 2 o'clock, near the observatory, with the tall man in black, at whose desire she has carried off this young country girl, by the help of the Schoolmaster and Tortillard; and Barbillon drove the hackney coach which the tall man in black had hired for the job. So how, mother, do you suppose the Chouette would inform against us, when she tells us the jobs she has in hand, and we do not tell her ours? For she knows nothing of this drowning job that is to come off directly. Be easy, mother; wolves don't eat each other, and this will be a good day's work. And when I recollect, too, that the jewel matcher has often about her 20 to 30,000 francs worth of diamonds in her bag, and that, in less than 2 hours, we shall have her in Bras Rouge's cellar. 30,000 francs worth of diamonds, mother! Think of that! And whilst we lay hands on this woman, Bras Rouge is to remain outside the cabaret?" inquired the widow, with an air of suspicion. "Well, and where would you have him, I should like to know?" "If any one comes to his house, mustn't he be outside the door to answer them, and prevent them from entering the place whilst we are doing our job?" "Nicholas! Nicholas!" cried Calabash, at this moment, from outside. "Here come the 2 women!" "Quick, quick, mother, your shawl! I will land you on the other side, and that will be so much done," said Nicholas. The widow had replaced her mourning head dress with a high black cap, in which she now made her appearance. At the instigation of Nicholas, she wrapped herself in a large plaid shawl, with gray and white checks; and after having carefully closed and secured the kitchen door, she placed the key behind one of the window shutters on the ground floor, and followed her son, who was hastily pursuing his way to the landing place. Almost involuntarily, as she quitted the island, she cast a long and meditative look at Martial's window; and the train of thought to which its firmly nailed and iron-bound exterior gave rise seemed, to judge by their effect, to be of a very mingled and complicated character, for she knitted her brows, pursed her lips, and then, after a sudden convulsive shudder, she murmured in a low, hesitating voice, "It is his own fault, it is his own fault!" "Nicholas, do you see them? Just down there, along the path, a country girl and an old woman!" exclaimed Calabash, pointing to the other side of the river, where Madame Séraphin and Fleur de Marie were descending a narrow, winding path which passed by a high bank, on the top of which were the lime kilns. "Let us wait for the signal. Don't let us spoil the job by too much haste," said Nicholas. "What, are you blind? Don't you recognise the stout woman who came the day before yesterday? Look at her orange shawl. And the little country girl, what a hurry she seems in! She's a good little thing, I know, and it's plain she has no idea of what is going to happen to her, or she wouldn't hasten on that pace, I'm thinking. Yes, I recollect the stout woman now. It's all right, then, all right. Although they are so much behind the time, I had almost given up the job as bad. But let us quite understand the thing, Calabash. I shall take the old woman and the young girl in the boat with a valve to it. You will follow me close on, stern to stern. And mind and row steadily, so that, with one spring, I may jump from one boat to the other, as soon as I have opened the pipe and the water begins to sink the boat. Don't be afraid about me. It is not the first time I have pulled a boat, is it? I am not afraid of being drowned, you know I can swim. But if I did not jump well into the other boat, why, the women, in their struggles against drowning, might catch hold of me, and much obliged to you, but I have no fancy for a bath with the two ladies." "The old woman waves her handkerchief," said Calabash. "There they are, on the bank." "Come along, mother, let's push off," said Nicholas, unmooring. "Come you into the boat with the valve, then the two women will not have any fear. And you, Calabash, jump into t'other, and use your arms, my girl, and pull a good one. Ah, by the way, take the boat hook and put it beside you; it is as sharp as a lance, and it may be useful," added the ruffian, as he placed beside Calabash in the boat a long hook with a sharp iron point. A few moments, and the two boats, one rowed by Nicholas and the other by Calabash, reached the shore, where, for some moments, Madame Séraphin and Fleur de Marie had been waiting. Whilst Nicholas was fastening his boat to a post on the bank, Madame Séraphin approached him, and said, in a low and rapid tone, "Say that Madame Georges is waiting for us at the island, you understand?" And then, in a louder voice, she added, "We are rather late, my lad." "Yes, my good lady, Madame Georges has been asking for you several times." "You see, my dear young lady, Madame Georges is waiting for us," said Madame Séraphin, turning to Fleur de Marie, who, in spite of her confidence, had felt considerable repugnance at the sight of the sinister countenances of Calabash, Nicholas, and the widow. But the mention of Madame Georges reassured her, and she replied: "I am just as impatient to see Madame Georges. Fortunately, it is not a long way across." "How delighted the dear lady will be!" said Madame Séraphin; then, addressing Nicholas, "Now then, my lad, bring your boat a little closer that we may get in," adding, in an undertone, "The girl must be drowned, mind; if she comes up thrust her back again into the water." "All right, ma'am, and don't be alarmed yourself; but when I make you the signal, give me your hand, she'll then pass under all alone, for everything's ready, and you have nothing to fear," replied Nicholas, in a similar tone; and then, with savage brutality, unmoved by Fleur de Marie's youth and beauty, he put his hand out to her. The young girl leaned lightly on him and entered the boat. "Now you, my good lady," said Nicholas to Madame Séraphin, offering her his hand in turn. Was it presentiment, or mistrust, or only fear that she could not spring quickly enough out of the little bark in which Nicholas and the Goualeuse were, that made Jacques Ferrand's housekeeper say to Nicholas, shrinking back, "No, I'll go in the boat with mademoiselle?" And she took her seat by Calabash. "Just as you please," said Nicholas, exchanging an expressive look with his sister as, with a vigorous thrust with his oar, he drove his boat from the bank. His sister did the same directly Madame Séraphin was seated beside her. Standing, looking fixedly on the bank, indifferent to the scene, the widow, pensive and absorbed, fixed her look obstinately on Martial's window, which was discernible from the landing place through the poplars. During this time the two boats, in the first of which were Nicholas and Fleur de Marie, and in the other Calabash and Madame Séraphin, left the bank slowly. End of Chapter 15. Read by Celine Major. Chapter 16 of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 4, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The happiness of meeting. Before the reader is made acquainted with the dénouement of the drama then passing in Nicholas's boat, we shall beg leave to retrace our steps. Shortly after Fleur de Marie had quitted St. Lazare in company of Madame Séraphin, La Louve also left that prison. Thanks to the recommendations of Madame Armand and the governor, who were desirous of recompensing her for her kindness towards Mont Saint Jean, the few remaining days the beloved of Martial had still to remain in confinement were remitted her. A complete change had come over this hitherto depraved, degraded, and intractable being. Forever brooding over the description of the peaceful, wild, and retired life so beautifully depictured by Fleur de Marie, La Louve entertained the utmost horror and disgust of her past life. To bury herself with Martial in the deep shades of some vast forest, such was her waking and dreaming thought. The one fixed idea of her existence, against which all her former evil inclinations had in vain struggled when, separating herself from La Goualeuse, whose growing influence she feared, this singular creature had retired to another part of St. Lazare. To complete this sincere though rapid conversion, still more assured by the ineffectual resistance attempted by the perverse and forward habits of her companion Fleur de Marie, following the dictates of her own natural good sense, had thus reasoned: La Louve, a violent and determined creature, is passionately fond of Martial. She would, then, hail with delight the means of quitting the disgraceful life she now, for the first time, views with shame and disgust, for the purpose of entirely devoting herself to the rude, unpolished man whose taste she so entirely partakes of, and who seeks to hide himself from the world as much from inclination as from a desire of escaping from the universal reprobation in which his family is viewed. Assisted by these small materials, gleaned during her conversation with La Louve, Fleur de Marie, in giving a right direction to the unbridled passion and restraining the daring hardihood of the reckless creature, had positively converted a lost, wretched being into an honest woman. For what could the most virtuous of her sex have desired more than to bestow her undivided affections on the man of her choice, to dwell with him in the silence and solitude of woods, where hard labour, privations, and poverty would all be cheerfully borne and shared for his dear sake, to whom her heart was given? And such was the constant, ardent prayer of La Louve. Relying on the assistance which Fleur de Marie had assured her of in the name of an unknown benefactor, La Louve determined to make her praiseworthy proposal to her lover, not, indeed, without the keen and bitter apprehension of being rejected by him, for La Goualeuse, while she brought her to blush for her past life, awakened her to a just sense also of her position as regarded Martial. Once at liberty, La Louve thought only of seeing her man, as she called him. He took exclusive possession of her mind. She had heard nothing of him for several days. In the hopes of meeting him in the Ile du Ravageur, and with the determination of waiting there until he came, should she fail to find him at first, she paid the driver of a cabriolet liberally to conduct her with all speed to the bridge of Asnières, which she crossed about a quarter of an hour before Madame Séraphin and Fleur de Marie, they having walked from the barrier, had reached the banks of the river near the lime kilns. As Martial did not present himself to ferry La Louve across to the Ile du Ravageur, she applied to an old fisherman, named Father Férot, who lived close by the bridge. It was about 4 o'clock in the day when a cabriolet stopped at the entrance of a small street in the village of Asnières. La Louve leaped from it at one bound, threw a 5-franc piece to the driver, and proceeded with all haste to the dwelling of old Férot, the ferryman. La Louve, no longer dressed in her prison garb, wore a gown of dark green merino, a red imitation of cashmere shawl with large, flaming pattern, and a net cap trimmed with riband. Her thick, curly hair was scarcely smoothed out, her impatient longing to see Martial having rendered an ordinary attention to her toilette quite impossible. Any other female would, after so long a separation, have exerted her very utmost to appear becomingly adorned at her first interview with her lover. But La Louve knew little and cared less for all these coquettish arts, which ill accorded with her excitable nature. Her predominating desire was to see her man as quickly as possible, and this impetuous wish was caused not alone by the fervour of a love which, in minds as wild and unregulated as hers, sometimes leads on to madness, but also from a yearning to pour into the ear of Martial the virtuous resolutions she had formed, and to reveal to him the bright vista of happiness opened to both by her conversation with Fleur de Marie. The flying steps of La Louve soon conducted her to the fisherman's cottage, and there, seated tranquilly before the door, she found Father Férot, an old, white-headed man, busily employed mending his nets. Even before she came close up to him, La Louve cried out, "Quick, quick, Father Férot! Your boat! Your boat!" "What, is it you, my girl? Well, how are you? I have not seen you this long while." I know, but where is your boat? And take me across to the isle as fast as you can row." "My boat? Well, to be sure, now how very unlucky! As if it was to be so! Bless you, my girl, it is quite out of my power to ferry you across to day." "But why? Why is it?" "Why, you see, my son has taken my boat to go up to the boat races held at St. Bless your heart, I don't think there's a boat left all along the river's side." "Distraction!" exclaimed La Louve, stamping her foot and clenching her hand. "Then all is lost. I shall not be able to see him." "'Pon my honour and word it's true, though," said old Férot. "I am extremely sorry I am unable to ferry you over, because, no doubt, by your going on so he is very much worse. Who is much worse? Who?" "Why, Martial." "Martial!" exclaimed La Louve, snatching the sleeve of the old fellow's jacket. "My man ill? Bless me! Did you not know it?" "Martial! Do you mean Martial?" "To be sure I do. But don't hold me so tight, you'll tear my blouse. Now be quiet, there's a good girl. I declare you frighten me, you stare about so wildly." "Ill? Martial ill? How long has he been so?" "Oh, 2 or 3 days." "'Tis false! He would have written and told me of it, had it been so."
"Ah, but then, don't you see? He's been too bad to handle a pen."
"Too ill to write, and he is on the isle? Are you quite sure he is there?"
"Why, I'll tell you. You must know this morning I meets the widow Martial. Now you are aware, my girl, that most, in general, when I notice her coming one way I make it my business to go to the other, for I am not particular fond of her. I can't say I am. So then—"
"But my man, tell me of him."
"Wait a bit, I'm coming to him. So when I found I couldn't get away from the mother, and, to speak the honest truth, that woman makes me afraid to seem to slight her. She has a sort of an evil look about her, like one as could do you any manner of harm for only wishing for. I can't account for it. I don't know what it is, for I'm not timorous by nature, but somehow the widow Martial does downright scare me. Well, says I, thinking just to say a few words and pass on, 'I haven't seen anything of your son Martial these last 2 or 3 days,' says I. 'I suppose he's not with you just now?' Upon which she fixed her eyes upon me with such a look! 'Tis well they were not pistols, or they would have shot me, as folks say."
"You drive me wild! And then, what said she?" Father Férot was silent for a minute or two, and then added,
"Come now, you are a right sort of girl. If you will only promise me to be secret, I will tell you all I know."
"Concerning my man?"
"Ay, to be sure, for Martial is a good fellow, though somewhat thoughtless; and it would be a sore pity should any mischance befall him through that old wretch of a mother or his rascally brother."
"But what is going on? What have his mother or brother done? And where is he, eh? Speak, I tell you, speak!"
"Well, well, have a little patience. And I say, do just let my blouse alone. Come, take your hands off, there's a good girl. If you keep interrupting me and tear my clothes in this way, I shall never be able to finish my story, and you will know nothing at last."
"Oh, how you try my patience!" exclaimed La Louve, stamping her foot with intense passion.
"And you promise never to repeat a word of what I am about to tell you?"
"No, no, I never will."
"Upon your word of honour?"
"Father Férot, you will drive me mad."
"Oh, what a hot-headed girl it is! Well, now, then this is what I have got to say. But first and foremost, I must tell you that Martial is more than ever at variance with his family, and if he were to get some foul play at their hands, I should not be at all surprised; and that makes me the more sorry my boat is not at hand to help you across the water, for if you reckon upon either Nicholas or Calabash taking you over to the isle, why, you'll just find yourself disappointed, that's all."
"I know that as well as you do, but what did my man's mother tell you? He was in the isle, then, when he fell ill, was he not?"
"Don't you put me out so with your questions. Let me tell my story my own way. This morning I says to the widow, 'Why,' says I have seen nothing of Martial these last 2 or 3 days. I mark his boat is still moored; he don't seem to use it as usual. I suppose he's gone away a bit? Maybe he's in Paris upon business?' Upon which the widow gave me, oh, such a devil's look! So says she, 'He's bad abed in the isle, and we don't look for him to get better.' 'Oh, oh!' says I to myself, 'that's it, is it? It's 3 days since—' 'Holla! Stop, I say!' cried old Férot, interrupting himself. 'Where the deuce are you going? What is the girl after now?'
Believing the life of Martial in danger from the inhabitants of the isle, and unable longer to endure the twaddle of the old fisherman, La Louve rushed, half frantic with rage and fear, towards the banks of the Seine. Some topographical descriptions will be requisite for the perfect understanding of this ensuing scene. The Ile du Ravageur was nearer to the left bank of the river than it was to the right, from which Fleur de Marie and Madame Séraphin had embarked. La Louve stood on the left bank. Without being extremely high, the surface of the isle completely prevented those on one side the river from seeing what was passing on the opposite bank. Thus La Louve had been unable to witness the embarkation of La Goualeuse, while the Martial family had been equally prevented from seeing La Louve, who, at that very instant, was rushing in wild desperation along the banks of the other side of the river. Let us also recall to the reader that the country house belonging to Doctor Griffon, and temporarily occupied by the Count Saint Remy, was midway between the land and that part of the shore where La Louve arrived half wild with apprehension and impatience. Unconsciously she rushed past two individuals, who, struck with her excited manner and haggard looks, turned back to watch her proceedings. These two personages were the Count Saint Remy and Doctor Griffon. The first impulse of La Louve, upon learning the danger which threatened her lover, was to hurry towards the spot from whence the peril proceeded. But, as she reached the water's edge, she became painfully sensible of the difficulties that stood in the way of her reaching the opposite land. As the old fisherman had assured her, she well knew the folly of expecting any strangers to pass by, and none of the Martial family would take the trouble of rowing over to fetch her to the isle. Heated and breathless, her eyes sparkling with eager excitement, she stopped opposite that point of the isle which, taking a sudden bend in this direction, was the nearest approach from the shore. Through the leafless branches of the willows and poplars, La Louve could see the roof of the very house where Martial perhaps lay dying. At this distracting idea, La Louve uttered a wild cry of desperation, then, snatching off her shawl and cap, she slipped out of her gown; and, undressed as she was to her petticoat, she threw herself intrepidly into the river, waited until she got out of her depth, and then, fearlessly striking out, she swam determinedly towards the isle, affording a strange spectacle of wild and desperate energy. At each fresh impulsion of the arms, the long, thick hair of La Louve, unfastened by the violent exercise she was using, shook and waved about her head like the rich mane of a war horse. But for the fixedness of her gaze, constantly riveted on the house which contained Martial, and the contraction of her features, drawn together by almost the convulsive agonies of fear and dreadful anticipation of arriving too late, the poacher's mistress might have been supposed to have been merely enjoying the cool refreshment of the water for her own sport and diversion, so boldly and freely did she swim. Tattooed in remembrance of her lover, her white but sinewy arms, strong as those of a man, divided the waters with a stroke which sent the sparkling element in rushing streams of liquid pearls over her broad shoulders and strong, expansive chest, resembling a block of half-submerged marble. All at once, from the other side of the isle, rose a cry of distress, a cry of agony at once fearful and despairing. La Louve started, and suddenly stopped in her rapid course. Then, supporting herself with one hand, with the other she pushed back her thick dripping hair, and listened. Again the cry was repeated, but more feebly, supplicatory, convulsive, and expiring, and the most profound silence reigned around. "'Tis Martial! 'Tis his cry! He calls me to his aid!" exclaimed La Louve, swimming with renewed vigour, for, in her excited state of mind, the voice which had rent the air, and sent a pang through her whole frame, seemed to her to be that of her lover. The count and the doctor, whom La Louve had rushed so quickly by, were quite unable to overtake her in time to prevent her daring attempt, but both arrived immediately opposite the isle at the moment when those frightful cries were heard. Both stopped, as perfectly shocked and startled as La Louve had been. Observing the desperate energy with which she battled with the water, they exclaimed, "The unfortunate creature means to drown herself!" But their fears were in vain. Martial's mistress swam like an otter, and, with a few more vigorous strokes, the intrepid creature had reached the land. She gained her feet, and, to assist her in climbing up the bank, she took hold of one of the stakes used as a sort of protecting stockade at the extremity of the isle, when at that instant, as partially in the water and holding on by one hand, she saw drifting along the form of a young female, dressed after the fashion of the country girls who come to Paris with their wares. The body floated slowly on with the current, which drove it against the piles, while the garments served to render it buoyant. To cling to one of the strongest stakes, and with the hand left free to snatch at the clothes of the female as it was passing, was the instantaneous impulse of La Louve, an impulse executed as rapidly as conceived. In her extreme eagerness, however, she drew the unfortunate being she sought to save so suddenly and violently towards her and within the small enclosure formed by the piles, that the body sunk completely under water, though here it was shallow enough to walk to land. Gifted with skill and strength far from common, La Louve raised La Goualeuse, for she it was, although not as yet recognised by her late friend, took her up in her powerful arms as though she had been a child, and laid her on the grassy banks of the isle. "Courage! Courage!" shouted M. Saint Remy from the opposite side, having, as well as Doctor Griffon, witnessed this bold deliverance. "We will make all haste to cross the bridge of Esnères, and bring a boat to your assistance." After thus speaking, both the count and his companion proceeded as quickly as they were able in the direction of the bridge; but La Louve heard not the words addressed to her. Let us again repeat, that from the right bank of the Seine, on which Nicholas, Calabash, and their mother assembled after the commission of their atrocious crime, it was impossible, owing to its steepness, to observe what was passing on the opposite shore. Fleur de Marie, abruptly drawn by La Louve within the piles, having first sunk completely from the eyes of her murderers, was thus in safety from any further pursuit on their part, they believing that she had effectually perished. A few instants after, the current, as it swept by, carried with it a second body, floating near the surface of the water; but La Louve perceived it not. It was the corpse of Madame Séraphin, the notary's femme de charge. She, however, was perfectly dead. It was as much the interest of Nicholas and Calabash as it was of Jacques Ferrand to remove so formidable a witness as well as sharer of their crime. Seizing the opportunity, therefore, when the boat sunk with Fleur de Marie, to spring into that rowed by his sister, and in which Madame Séraphin, he contrived to give the small vessel so great a shock as almost threw the femme de charge into the water, and, while struggling to recover herself, he managed to thrust her overboard, and then to finish her with his boat hook. Breathless and exhausted, La Louve, kneeling on the grass beside Fleur de Marie, tried to recover her strength, and at the same time to make out the features of her she had saved from certain death. Who can describe her surprise, her utter astonishment, as she recognised her late prison companion, she who had exercised so beneficial an influence on her mind, and produced so complete a change in her conduct and ideas? In the first bewilderment of her feelings, even Martial was forgotten. "La Goualeuse!" exclaimed she, as, with head bent down, her hair dishevelled, her garments streaming with wet, she, kneeling, contemplated the unhappy girl stretched almost dying before her on the grass. Pale, motionless, her half-closed eyes vacant and senseless, her beautiful hair glued to her pallid brows, her lips blue and livid, her small, delicate hands stiff and cold, La Goualeuse might well have passed for dead to any but the watchful eye of affection. "La Goualeuse!" again cried La Louve. "What a singular chance that I should have come hither to relate to my man all the good and harm she has done me with her words and promises, as well as the resolution I have taken, and to find the poor thing thus to give me the meeting. Poor girl! She is cold and dead." "But no, no!" exclaimed La Louve, stooping still more closely over Fleur de Marie, and, as she did so, finding a faint, indeed, almost imperceptible, breath escape her lips. "No, she lives! Merciful Father, she breathes! And 'tis I have snatched her from death, I, who never yet saved any one! Oh, how happy the thought makes me! My heart glows with a new delight. How thankful I feel that none but I saved her! Ah, but my man, I must save him also! Perhaps he is even now in his death throes, his mother and brother are even wretches enough to murder him. What shall I do? I cannot leave this poor creature here. I will carry her to the widow's house. She must and she shall succour the poor Goualeuse and let me see Martial, or I will smash everything in my way. No mother, brother, or sister shall hinder me from going wherever my man is." And, springing up as she spoke, La Louve raised Fleur de Marie in her strong arms. Charged with this slender burthen, she hurried towards the house, never for a moment doubting that, in spite of their hard and wicked natures, The widow and her daughter would bestow on Fleur de Marie every requisite care. When Martial's mistress had reached that point of the isle from which both sides of the Seine were distinguishable, Nicholas, his mother, and Calabash had quitted the place, certain of the accomplishment of their double crime. They then repaired, in all haste, to the house of Bras Rouge. At this moment, a man, who, hidden in one of the recesses of the river concealed by the lime kiln, had, without being seen himself, witnessed the whole progress of this horrible scene, also disappeared. Believing as well as the guilty perpetrators that the fell deed had been fully achieved. This man was Jacques Ferrand. One of Nicholas's boats was rocking to and fro, moored to a stake on the river bank, just where Madame Séraphin and La Goualeuse had embarked. Scarcely had Jacques Ferrand quitted the lime kiln to return to Paris, than M. de Saint-Remy and Doctor Griffon hastily crossed the bridge of Asnières, for the purpose of reaching the isle, which they contemplated doing by means of Nicholas's boat, which they had discerned from afar. To the extreme astonishment of La Louve, when she arrived at the house in the Isle du Ravageur, she found the door shut and fastened. Placing the still inanimate form of Fleur de Marie beneath the porch, she more closely examined the dwelling. The window of Martial's chamber was well known to her. What was her surprise to find the shutters belonging to it closed, and sheets of tin nailed over them, strongly secured from without by 2 bars of iron. Suspecting a part of the cause of this, La Louve, in a loud, hoarse voice of mingled fury and deep tenderness, screamed out as loudly as she could, "Martial! My man!" No answer was returned. Terrified at this silence, La Louve began pacing round and round the house like a wild beast who scents the spot whither her mate has been entrapped, and with deep roars and savage growls demands admittance to him. Still pursuing her agitated search, La Louve kept shouting from time to time, "My man! Are you there, my man?" And in her desperate fury she shook and rattled the bars of the kitchen windows, beat against the walls, and knocked long and loudly at the door. All at once a dull, indistinct noise was heard from withinside the house. Eagerly and attentively La Louve listened. The noise, however, ceased. "My man heard me. I must and will get in somehow, if I gnaw the door away with my teeth." And again she reiterated her frantic cries and adjurations to Martial. Several faint blows struck inside the closed shutters of Martial's chamber replied to the yells and screams of La Louve. "He is there!" cried she, suddenly stopping beneath the window of her lover. "He is there, I am sure of it; and if all other means fail, I will strip off that tin with my nails, but I will wrench those shutters open." So saying, she glanced frantically around in search of something to aid her efforts to free her lover, when her eye caught sight of a ladder partly hanging against one of the outside shutters of the sitting room. Hastily pulling the shutter, the more quickly to disengage the ladder, the key of the outer door, left by the window on the sill of the window, fell to the ground. "Oh, if this be only the right key!" cried La Louve, trying it in the lock of the entrance door. "I can go straight up stairs to his chamber. Oh, it turns! It opens!" exclaimed La Louve, with delight, "and my man is saved!" Once in the kitchen, she was struck by the cries of the 2 children, who, shut up in the cellar and hearing an unusual noise, called loudly for help. The widow, persuaded that no person would visit the isle or her dwelling, had contented herself with double locking the door upon François and Amandine, leaving the key in the lock. Released by La Louve, the 2 children hurried from the cellar to the kitchen. "Oh, La Louve!" exclaimed François, "save our dear brother Martial! They want him to die. For 2 days he has been shut up in his room." "They have not wounded him, have they?" "No, no, I think not." "I have arrived just in time, it seems," cried La Louve, rushing towards the staircase and hastily mounting the stairs. Then, suddenly stopping, she exclaimed, "Ah, but La Goualeuse! I quite forgot her. Amandine, my child, light a fire directly, and then do you and your brother fetch a poor half drowned girl you will find lying outside the door under the porch, and place her before the fire. She would have been quite dead if I had not saved her. François, quick! Bring me a crowbar, a hatchet, an axe, anything, that I may break in the door that confines my man." "There is the cleaver we split wood with, but it is too heavy for you," said the lad, dragging forward an enormous chopper. "Too heavy? I don't even feel it!" cried La Louve, swinging the ponderous weapon, which, at another time, she would have had much difficulty in lifting, as though it had been a feather. Then, proceeding with hurried steps upstairs, she called out to the children, "Go and fetch the young girl I told you of, and place her by the fire." And with 2 bounds, La Louve reached the corridor at the end of which was situated the apartment of Martial. "Courage, courage, my man! Your Louve is here!" cried she, and lifting the cleaver with both hands, she dashed it furiously against the door. "It is fastened on the outside," moaned Martial in a feeble voice. "Draw out the nails. You cannot open it otherwise." Throwing herself upon her knees in the passage, by the help of the edge of the cleaver, her nails, which she almost tore bleeding from their roots, and her fingers, which were lacerated and torn, La Louve contrived to extract the huge nails which fastened the door all around. At length her heroic exertions were crowned with success. The door yielded to her efforts, and Martial, pale, bleeding, and almost exhausted, fell into the arms of his mistress. "At last I have you! I hold you! I press you to my heart!" exclaimed La Louve, as she received and tenderly pressed Martial in her arms, with a joy of possession that partook almost of savage energy. She supported, or rather carried him to a bench placed in the corridor. For several minutes Martial remained weak and haggard, endeavouring to recover from the violent surprise which had proved nearly too much for his exhausted strength. La Louve had come to the succour of her lover at the very instant when, worn out and despairing, he felt himself dying, less from want of food than air, which it was impossible to obtain in so small an apartment unprovided with a chimney or any other outlet, and hermetically closed, thanks to the fiendish contrivance of Calabash, who had stopped even the most trifling crevices in the door and window with pieces of old rag. Trembling with joy and apprehension, her eyes streaming with tears, La Louve, kneeling beside Martial, watched his slightest movements, and intently gazed on his features. The unfortunate youth seemed gradually to recover as his lungs inhaled a freer and more healthful atmosphere. After a few convulsive shudderings, he raised his languid head, heaved a deep sigh, and, opening his eyes, looked eagerly around him. "Martial, 'tis I, your Louve. How are you now?" "Better," replied he, in a feeble voice. "Thank God! Would you have a little water or some vinegar?" "No, no," replied Martial, speaking more naturally. "Air, air! Oh, I want only air!" At the risk of gashing the backs of her hands, La Louve drove them through the 4 panes of a window she could not have opened without first removing a large and heavy table. "Now I breathe freely, and my head seems quite relieved," said Martial, entirely recovering his senses and voice. Then, as if recalling for the first time the service his mistress had rendered him, he exclaimed with a burst of ineffable gratitude, "But for you, my brave Louve, I should soon have been dead." "Oh, never mind thinking of that, but tell me, how do you find yourself now?" "Better, much better." "You are hungry, I doubt not?" "No, I feel myself too weak for that. What I have suffered most cruelly from has been want of air. At last I felt suffocating, strangling, choking. Oh, it was dreadful! But now I live again, I come forth from the very tomb itself, and that, too, thanks to you." "And these cuts upon your poor bleeding hands, for God's sake, what have they done to you?" "Nicholas and Calabash, not daring to attack me openly a second time, fastened me up in my chamber to allow me to perish of hunger in it. I tried to prevent their nailing up my shutters, and my sister chopped my fingers with a hatchet." "The monsters! They wished to make it appear that you had died of sickness. Your mother had spread the report of your being in a hopeless state. Your mother, my man, your own mother!" "Hold!" cried Martial, with bitterness. "Mention her not." Then, for the first time remarking the wet garments and singular state of La Louve's attire, he added, "But what has happened to you? Your hair is dripping wet; you have only your underclothes on, and they are drenched through." "No matter, no matter what has happened to me, since you are saved. Oh, yes, saved!" "But explain to me how you became thus wet through." "I knew you were in danger, and finding no boat." "You swam to my rescue?" "I did; but your hands? Give them to me that I may heal them with my kisses. You are in pain, I fear? Oh, the monsters! And I not here to help you! "Oh, my brave Louve!" exclaimed Martial, enthusiastically. "Bravest and best of all brave creatures!" "Did not your hand trace on my arm, 'Death to the cowardly'? See!" cried La Louve, showing her tattooed arm, on which these very words were indelibly engraved. "Yes, you are bold and intrepid; but the cold has seized you, you tremble." "Indeed, it is not with cold." "Never mind; go in there, you will find Calabash's cloak; wrap yourself well in it." "But " "I insist." In an instant La Louve, who had quickly flown at her lover's second command, returned wrapped in a plaid mantle. "To think you ran the risk of drowning yourself, and all for me!" resumed Martial, gazing on her with enthusiastic delight. "Oh, no, not altogether for you. A poor girl was nearly perishing in the river, and I saved her as I landed." "Saved her also? And where is she?" "Below with the children, who are taking care of her." "And who is she?" "Oh, dear, you can scarcely credit what a singular and lucky chance brought me to her rescue. She was one of my companions at St. Lazare, a most extraordinary sort of girl, and you don't half know." "How so?" "Only conceive my both hating and loving her, for she had introduced happiness and death into my heart and thoughts." "Who? This girl?" "Yes, and all on your account." "On mine?" "Hark ye, Martial!" Then interrupting her proposed speech, La Louve continued, "No, no, I never can " "What?" "I had a request to make to you, and for that purpose I came hither, because when I quitted Paris I knew nothing of your danger." "Then speak, pray do." "I dare not." "Dare not, after all you have done for me?" "No, for then it would appear as though I claimed a right to be rewarded." "A right to be rewarded? And have you not already earned that right? Do I not already owe you much? And did you not tend my sick bed with unfailing watchfulness both night and day during my illness of the past year? Are you not my man, my own dear man? And for the reason that I am and ever shall be your man, are you not bound to speak openly and candidly to me?" "For ever, Martial." "Yes, for ever, as true as my name is Martial. I shall never care for any other woman in the world but you, my brave Louve. Never mind what you may have been, or what you may have done, that is nobody's affair but mine. I love you, and you love me; and, moreover, I owe you my life. But somehow, do you know, since you have been in prison I have not been like the same person. All sorts of fresh thoughts have come into my mind. I have thought it well over, and I have resolved that you shall no more be what you have been." "What can you mean?" "That I will never more quit you; neither will I part from François and Amandine." "Your young sister and brother?" "Yes. From this day forward I must be as a second father to these poor children. Don't you see, by imposing on myself fresh duties, I am compelled to alter and amend what is amiss in my way of conducting myself? But I consider it my positive task to take charge of these young things, or they will be made artful thieves; and the only way to save them is to take them from here." "Where to?" "That I know not, but certainly far from Paris." "And me?" "You? Why, of course, you go with me." "With you?" exclaimed La Louve, with joyful surprise; she could not credit the reality of such happiness. "And shall I never again be parted from you?" "No, my brave girl, never. You will help me to bring up my little sister and young brother. I know your heart. When I say to you, 'I greatly wish my poor little Amandine to grow up a virtuous and industrious woman,' just talk to her about it, and show her what to do, I am quite sure and certain that you will be to her all the best mother could be to her own child." "Oh, thanks, Martial! Thanks, thanks!" "We shall live like honest work people. Never fear but we shall find work; for we will toil like slaves to content our employers; but, at least, these children will not be depraved and degraded beings like their parents. I shall not continually hear myself taunted with my father and brother's disgraceful end, neither shall I go through streets where you are known." "But what is the matter? What ails you?" "Oh, Martial, I feel as though I should go mad." "Mad? For what?" "For joy." "And why should you go mad with joy?" Because it is too much." "What?" "I mean that what you propose is too great happiness for one like me to hope for. Oh, indeed, it is more than I can bear! But who knows? Perhaps saving La Goualeuse has brought me good luck. That's it, I am sure and certain. Still, I ask you, what is the matter, and why are you thus agitated?" exclaimed Martial. "Oh, Martial, Martial, the very thing you have been proposing." "Well?" "I was going to ask you." "To quit Paris?" "Yes," replied she, in a hurried tone, "and to try your consent to accompany you to the forests, where we should have a nice, neat little house, and children whom I should love as La Louve would the children of her man; or if you would permit me," continued La Louve, in a faltering voice, "instead of calling you my man, to say my husband; for," added she, confusedly and rapidly, "for without that change we should not obtain the place." Martial, in his turn, regarded La Louve with deep astonishment, unable to comprehend her meaning. "What place are you speaking of?" said he, at length. "Of that of gamekeeper." "That I should have?" "Yes." "And who would give it to me?" "The protector of the young girl I saved." "They do not know me." "But I have told her all about you, and she will recommend us to her protector." "And what have you told her about me?" "Oh, Martial, can you not guess? Of what could I speak but of your goodness, and my love for you?" "My excellent Louve!" "And then, you know, being in prison together makes folks talk to each other, and open their hearts in the way of confidence. Besides which, there was something so gentle and engaging about this young creature, that I could not help feeling drawn towards her, even in spite of myself; for I very quickly discovered she was a very different person to such as you and I have been used to." "And who is she?" "I know not, neither can I guess; but certainly I never met with any one like her. Bless you, she can read the very thoughts of your heart, the same as if she were a fairy. I merely told her of my love for you, and she immediately interested herself in us. She made me feel ashamed of my past life, not by saying harsh and severe things, you know very well that would not have done much good with me, but by talking of the pleasures of a life passed in hard but peaceful labour, tranquilly within the quiet shades of deep forests, where you might be occupied according to your tastes and inclinations; only, instead of your being a poacher, she made you a gamekeeper, and in place of my being only your mistress, she pictured me as your true and lawful wife. And then we were to have fine, healthy children who ran joyfully to meet you when you returned at night, followed by your faithful dogs, and carrying your gun on your shoulder. Then we all sat down so gay and happy, to eat our supper beneath the cool shade of the large trees that overhung our cottage door, while the fresh wind blew, and the moon peeped at us from amongst the thick branches, and the little ones prattled, and you related to us all you had seen and done during the day, while wandering in the forests; until, at last, cheerful and contented, we retired to rest, to rise the following day, and with light hearts to recommence our labours. I cannot tell you how it was, but I listened and listened to these delightful pictures till I quite believed in their reality. I seemed bound by a spell when she spoke of happiness like this, though I tried ever so much against it. I always found it impossible to believe that it would surely come to pass. Oh, but you have no idea how beautifully she described it all. I fancied I saw it, you, our children, our forest home. I rubbed my eyes, but it was ever before them, although a waking dream." "Ah, yes," said Martial, sighing, "that would indeed be a sweet and pleasant life. Without being bad at heart, poor François has been quite enough in the society of Calabash and Nicholas to make it far better he should dwell in the solitude of wood and forests, rather than be exposed to the further contamination of great towns. Amandine would help you in your household duties, and I should make a capital gamekeeper, from the very fact of my having been a poacher of some notoriety. I should have you for my housekeeper and companion, my good Louve. And then, as you know, we should have our children also. Bless their little hearts, I doubt not our having a fine flock about us. And what more could we wish for or desire? When once we got used to a forest life, it would seem as though we had always lived there, and 50 or 100 years would glide away like a single day. But you must not talk to me of such happiness.
it makes one so full of sadness and regrets that it cannot be realised. No, no, don't let us ever mention it again, because, don't you see, La Louve, it comes over one like, I should soon work myself up to madness if I allowed my thoughts to dwell on it. Ah, Martial, I let you go on because I thought I was quite as bad myself. I said just those very words to La Goualeuse." "Did you really?" "I did, indeed; for, after listening to all these tales of enchantment, I said to her, 'What a pity, La Goualeuse, that these castles in the air, as you call them, are not true!' And what do you think, Martial?" asked La Louve, her eyes flashing with joy. "What do you think she answered me?" "I don't know." "Why," said she, "only let Martial marry you, and give me your promise to live honestly and virtuously henceforward, and directly I quit the prison I will exert myself to get the place I have been speaking of for him." "Get me a gamekeeper's place?" "Yes, I declare to you, Martial, she said so." "Oh, but, as you say, that can be but a dream, a mere fancy. If, indeed, nothing were requisite for our obtaining the place but our being married, my good girl, that should be done to morrow, if I had the means; though from this very day and hour I consider you as my true and lawful wife." "Oh, Martial! I, your lawful wife?" "The only woman who shall ever bear that title; and, for the future, I wish you to call me husband, for such I am in word and heart, as firmly and lastingly as though we had been before the Maire." "Oh, La Goualeuse was right. A woman feels so proud and happy to say 'my husband.' Oh, Martial, you shall see what a good, faithful, devoted wife I will be to you, how hard I will work. Oh, I shall be so delighted to labour for you." "And do you really think there is any chance of our getting this place? If the poor dear Goualeuse deceives herself about it, it is that others deceive her, for she seemed quite sure of being able to fulfil her promise. And besides, when I was quitting the prison a little while ago, the inspectress told me that the protectors of La Goualeuse, who were people of rank and consequence, had removed her from confinement that very day. Now that proved her having powerful friends, so that she can keep her word to us if she likes." "But," cried Martial, suddenly rising, "I don't know what we have been thinking of all this time." "Thinking about? What do you mean, Martial?" "Why, the poor girl you saved from drowning is down stairs, perhaps dying; and, instead of rendering her any assistance, we are attending to our own affairs up stairs." "Make yourself perfectly easy. François and Amandine are there watching her, and they would have come to call us had there been any danger or necessity. Still, you are right. Let us go to her. You must see her to whom we shall, perhaps, owe all our future happiness." And Martial, supported by La Louve, descended to the lower part of the house. Before they have reached the kitchen, let us, in a few words, describe what had occurred there from the time when Fleur de Marie had been confided to the charge of the two children. CHAPTер XVI. Read by Celine Major. Chapter XVII of the Mysteries of Paris, Volume 4, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Doctor Griffon. François and Amandine had contrived to convey Fleur de Marie near the fire, when M. de Saint Remy and Doctor Griffon, who had crossed the river in Nicholas's boat, entered the house. Whilst the children were making the fire burn up, Doctor Griffon bestowed on the young girl his utmost care. "The poor girl cannot be more than 17 at most," exclaimed the count, who was looking on. "What do you think of her, doctor?" "Her pulse is scarcely perceptible, but, strange to say, the skin of the face is not livid in the subject, as is usually the case in asphyxia from submersion," replied the doctor with professional calmness, and contemplating Fleur de Marie with a deeply meditative air. Doctor Griffon was a tall, thin man, pallid, and completely bald, except 2 tufts of thin black hair, carefully brushed back on the poll, and flattened on the temples. His countenance, wrinkled and furrowed by the fatigues of study, was calm, intelligent, and reflective. Profoundly learned, of great experience, and a skilful practitioner, first surgeon at a civil hospital, where we shall again encounter him, Doctor Griffon had but one defect, that of completely abstracting himself from the patient, and only considering the disease.
Young or old, rich or poor, was no matter, he only thought of medical fact, more or less remarkable, which the subject presented. For him there was nothing but subjects. "What a lovely face! How beautiful she is in spite of this frightful paleness!" said M. de Saint Remy. "Did you ever see milder or more expressive features, my dear doctor? And so young, so young!" "Age is no consequence," said the doctor, abruptly, "no more than the presence of water in the lungs, which was formerly thought fatal. It was a gross error which the admirable experiments of Goodwin, the famous Goodwin, incontestably detected and exposed." "But, doctor—" "But it is a fact," replied M. Griffon, absorbed by the love of his art. "To detect the presence of any foreign liquid in the lungs, Goodwin plunged some cats and dogs several times into tubs filled with ink for some seconds, taking them out alive, and then, after a time, dissected the animals. Well, he was convinced from the dissection that the ink had penetrated the lungs, and that the presence of this liquid in the respiratory organs had not caused the death of the subject." The count knew the doctor was a worthy creature at heart, but that his mad passion for science made him often appear harsh and cruel. "Have you any hope?" inquired M. de Saint Remy, impatiently. "The extremities of the subject are very cold," said the doctor. "There is but very slight hope." "Ah, poor child! To die at that age is indeed terrible." "Pupil fixed, dilated," observed the doctor, impassive, and pushing up the frigid eyelid of Fleur de Marie with his forefinger. "What a singular man!" exclaimed the comte, almost with indignation. "One would suppose you pitiless, and yet I have seen you watch by my bedside for nights together. Had I been your brother, you could not have been more generously devoted to me." Doctor Griffon, still occupied in doing all that was requisite and possible for Fleur de Marie, replied to the comte without looking at him, and with imperturbable phlegm: "Parbleu! Do you think one meets with an intermittent fever so wonderfully complicated as that you had? It was wonderful, my dear friend, astonishing! Stupor, delirium, muscular action of the tendons, syncopes, that important fever combined the most varied symptoms. You were, indeed, affected by a partial and momentary attack of paralysis; and if it had presented nothing else, why, your attack was entitled to all the attention in my power. You presented a magnificent study; and, truth to say, my dear friend, what I desire most in the world is to meet with such another glorious fever. But that is a piece of good fortune that never occurs twice." At this moment Martial descended, leaning on the arm of La Louve, who still retained over her wet clothes the plaid cloak which belonged to Calabash. Struck with the paleness of Martial, and remarking his hands covered with dried blood, the comte exclaimed, "Who is this man?" "My husband," replied La Louve, looking at Martial with an expression of happiness and noble pride impossible to describe. "You have a good and intrepid wife, sir," said the comte to him. "I saw her save this unfortunate young girl with singular courage." "Yes, sir, my wife is good and intrepid," replied Martial, with emphasis, and regarding La Louve with an air at once full of love and tenderness. "Yes, intrepid, for she has also come in time to save my life." "Your life?" exclaimed the comte. "Look at his hands, his poor hands!" said La Louve, wiping away the tears which softened the wild brightness of her eyes. "Horrible!" cried the comte. "See, doctor, how his hands are hacked." Doctor Griffon, turning his head slightly, and looking over his shoulder at Martial's hands, said to him, "Open and shut your hand." Martial did so with considerable pain. The doctor shrugged his shoulders, and continued his attentions to Fleur de Marie, saying merely, and as if with regret, "There's nothing serious in those cuts; there's no tendon injured. In a week the subject will be able to use his hands again." "Then, sir, my husband will not be crippled," said La Louve, with gratitude. The doctor shook his head affirmatively. "And La Goualeuse will recover, won't she, sir?" inquired La Louve. "Oh, she must live, for I and my husband owe her so much." Then, turning towards Martial, "Poor dear girl! There she is, as I told you, she who will, perhaps, be the cause of our happiness; for it was she who gave me the idea of coming and saying to you all I have said.
What a chance that I should save her, and here, too!"
"She is a providence," said Martial, struck by the beauty of La Goualeuse. "What an angel's face! Oh, she will recover, will she not, doctor?"
"I cannot say," replied the doctor.
"But, in the first place, can she remain here? Will she have all necessary attention?" "Here?" cried La Louve. "Why, they commit murder here!" "Silence! Silence!" said Martial. The comte and the doctor looked at La Louve with surprise. "This house in the isle has a bad reputation hereabouts, and I am not astonished at it," observed the doctor in a low tone to M. de Saint Remy. "You have, then, been the victim of some violence?" observed the comte to Martial. "How did you come by those wounds?" "They are nothing, nothing, sir. I had a quarrel, a struggle ensued, and I was wounded. But this young peasant girl cannot remain in this house," he added, with a gloomy air. "I cannot remain here myself, nor my wife, nor my brother, nor my sister, whom you see. We are going to leave the isle, never to return to it." "Oh, how nice!" exclaimed the two children. "Then what are we to do?" said the doctor, looking at Fleur de Marie. "It is impossible to think of conveying the subject to Paris in her present state of prostration. But then my house is quite close at hand; my gardener's wife and her daughter are capital nurses; and since the asphyxia by submersion interests you, my dear Saint Remy, why, you can watch over the necessary attentions, and I will come and see her every day." "And you assume the harsh and pitiless man," exclaimed the comte, "when, as your proposal proves, you have one of the noblest hearts in the world." "If the subject sinks under it, as is possible, there will be an opportunity for a most interesting dissection, which will allow me to confirm once again Goodwin's assertions." "How horridly you talk!" cried the comte. "For those who know how to read, the dead body is a book in which they learn to save the lives of the diseased," replied Doctor Griffon, stoically. "At last, then, you do good?" said M. de Saint Remy, with bitterness, "and that is important. What consequence is the cause provided that benefit results? Poor child! The more I look at her the more she interests me." "And well does she deserve it, I can tell you, sir," observed La Louve with excitement, and approaching him. "Do you know her?" inquired the comte. "Do I know her, sir? Why, it is to her I owe the happiness of my life, and I have not done for her half of what she has done for me." And La Louve looked passionately towards her husband. She no longer called him her man. "And who is she?" asked M. de Saint Remy. "An angel, sir, all that is good in this world. Yes; and although she is dressed as a country girl, there is no merchant's wife, no great lady, who can discourse as well as she can, with her sweet little voice just like music. She is a noble girl, I say, full of courage and goodness." "By what accident did she fall into the water?" "I do not know, sir." "Then she is not a peasant girl?" asked the comte. "A peasant girl? Look at her small white hands, sir." "True," observed M. de Saint Remy. "What a strange mystery! But her name, her family?" "Come along," said the doctor, breaking into the conversation; "we must convey the subject into the boat." Half an hour after this, Fleur de Marie, who had not yet recovered her senses, was in the doctor's abode, lying in a good bed, and maternally watched by M. Griffon's gardener's wife, to whom was added La Louve. The doctor promised M. de Saint Remy, who was more and more interested in La Goualeuse, to return to see her again in the evening. Martial went to Paris with François and Amandine, La Louve being unwilling to quit Fleur de Marie before she had been pronounced out of danger. The Ile du Ravageur remained deserted. We shall presently find its sinister inhabitants at Bras Rouge's, where they were to be joined by the Chouette for the murder of the diamond matcher. In the meantime, we will conduct the reader to the rendezvous which Tom, Sarah's brother, had with the horrible hag, the Schoolmaster's accomplice. CHAPTER XVIII. Read by Celine Major. Chapter XVIII of the Mysteries of Paris, Volume 4, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Portrait. Thomas Seyton, the brother of the Countess Sarah Macgregor, was walking impatiently on the boulevards near the Observatory, when he saw the Chouette arrive. The horrible belle dame had on a white cap and her usual plaid shawl. The point of a stiletto, as round as a thick swan's quill, and very sharp, having perforated a hole at the bottom of her large straw basket which she carried on her arm, the extremity of this murderous weapon, which had belonged to the Schoolmaster, might be seen projecting. Thomas Seyton did not perceive that the Chouette was armed.
"It has just struck 3 by the Luxembourg," said the old woman. "Here I am, like the hand of the clock."
"Come," replied Thomas Seyton; and, preceding her, he crossed some open fields, and, turning down a deserted alley near the Rue Cassini, he stopped halfway down the lane, which was barred by a turnstile, opened a small door, motioned to the Chouette to follow him, and, after having advanced with her a few steps down a path overgrown by thick trees, he said, "Wait here," and disappeared.
"That is, if you don't keep me on the waiting lay too long," responded the Chouette, "for I must be at Bras Rouge's at 5 o'clock to meet the Martials, and help silence the diamond matcher. It's very well I have my gully (poniard). Oh, the vagabond, he has got his nose out of window!" added the hag, as she saw the point of the stiletto coming through the seam in the basket. And, taking the weapon, which had a wooden handle, from the basket, she replaced it so that it was completely concealed. "This is Fourline's tool," she continued, "and he has asked me for it so many times to kill the rats who came skipping about him in his cellar. Poor things! They have no one but the old blind man to divert them and keep them company. They ought not to be hurt if they play about a bit. And so I will not let him hurt the dears, and I keep his tool to myself. Besides, I shall soon want it for this woman, perhaps. 30,000 francs worth of diamonds, what a haul for each of us! It'll be a good day's work, and not like that of the other day with that old notary, whom I thought to squeeze. It was no use to threaten him if he would not stand some blunt, that I would lay information that it was his housekeeper who had sent La Goualeuse to me by Tournemine when she was a little brat. Nothing frightened the old brute. He called me an old hag, and shoved me out of doors. Well, well, I'll send an anonymous letter to these people at the farm where Pegriotte was, to inform them that it was the notary who formerly abandoned her to me. Perhaps they know her family, and when she gets out of St. Lazare, why, the matter will get too hot for that old brute, Jacques Ferrand. Some one comes. Ah, it is the pale lady who was dressed in men's clothes at the tapis franc of the ogress, and with the tall fellow who just left me, the same that the Fourline and I robbed by the excavations near Notre Dame," added the Chouette, as she saw Sarah appear at the extremity of the walk. "Here's another job for me, I see; and this little lady must have something to do with our having carried off La Goualeuse from the farm. If she pays well for another job of work, why, that will be the ticket." As Sarah approached the Chouette, whom she saw again for the first time since their rencontre at the tapis franc, her countenance expressed the disdain, the disgust, which persons of a certain rank feel when they come in contact with low wretches whom they take as tools or accomplices. Thomas Seyton, who, until now, had actively served the criminal machinations of his sister, although he considered them as all but futile, had refused any longer to continue this contemptible part, consenting, nevertheless, for the first and last time to put his sister in communication with the Chouette, without himself interfering in the fresh projects they might plan. The countess, unable to win back Rodolph to her by breaking the bonds or the affections which she believed so dear to him, hoped, as we have seen, to render him the dupe of a base deceit, the success of which might realise the vision of this obstinate, ambitious, and cruel woman. Her design was to persuade Rodolph that their daughter was not dead, and to substitute an orphan for the child. We know that Jacques Ferrand, having formerly refused to participate in this plot in spite of Sarah's menaces, had resolved to make away with Fleur de Marie, as much from the fear of the Chouette's disclosure, as from fear of the obstinate persistence of the countess. But the latter had by no means abandoned her design, feeling persuaded that she should corrupt or intimidate the notary when she should be assured of having obtained a young girl capable of filling the character which she desired her to assume. After a moment's silence, Sarah said to the Chouette, "You are adroit, discreet, and resolute?" adroit as a monkey, resolute as a bulldog, and mute as a fish. Such is the Chouette, and such the devil made her, at your service if you want her, and you do," replied the old wretch, quickly. "I hope we have managed well with the young country wench who is now in St. Lazare for 2 good months." "We are not talking of her, but of something else." "Anything you please, my handsome lady, provided there's money at the end of what you mean to propose, and then we shall be as right as my fingers." Sarah could not control a movement of disgust. "You must know," she resumed, "many people in the lower ranks of life, persons who are in misfortune?" "There are more of them than there are of millionaires. You may pick and choose. We have plentiful wretchedness in Paris." "I want to meet with a poor orphan girl, and particularly if she lost her parents young. She must be good looking, of gentle disposition, and not more than 17 years of age." The Chouette gazed at Sarah with amazement. "Such an orphan girl must be by no means difficult to meet with," continued the countess. "There are so many foundling children." "Why, my good lady, you forget La Goualeuse. She is the very thing." "Who is La Goualeuse?" "The young thing we carried off from Bouqueval." "We are not talking of her now, I tell you." "But hear me, and be sure you pay me well for my advice. You want an orphan girl, as quiet as a lamb, as handsome as daylight, and who is only 17, you say?" "Certainly." "Well, then, take La Goualeuse when she leaves St. Lazare. She is the very thing for you, as if we had made her on purpose; for she was about 6 years of age when that scamp, Jacques Ferrand, and it's now 10 years ago, gave her to me with 1,000 francs in order to get rid of her; that is to say, it was Tournemine, who is now at the galleys at Rochefort, who brought her to me, saying there was no doubt she was some child they wanted to get rid of or pass off for dead." "Jacques Ferrand, do you say?" exclaimed Sarah, in a voice so choked that the Chouette receded several paces. "The notary, Jacques Ferrand, gave you this child, and " She could not finish, her emotion was too violent, and with her 2 clasped hands extended towards the Chouette, she trembled convulsively, surprise and joy agitating her features. "I don't know what it is that makes you so much in earnest, my good lady," replied the old hag, "but it is a very simple story. 10 years ago Tournemine, an old pal of mine, said to me, 'Have you a mind to take charge of a little girl that they want to get out of the way? No matter where she slips her wind or not, there's 1,000 francs for the job, and do what you like with the Kinchin.'" "10 years ago?" cried Sarah. "10 years." "A little fair girl?" "A little fair girl." "With blue eyes?" "Blue eyes, as bluebells." "And it was she who was at the farm?" "And we packed her up and carted her off to St. Lazare. I must say, though, that I didn't expect to find her, Pegriotte, in the country as I did, though." "Oh, mon Dieu! Mon Dieu!" exclaimed Sarah, falling on her knees, and elevating her hands and eyes to heaven. "Thy ways are inscrutable, and I bow down before thy providence. Oh, if such happiness to be possible! But no, I cannot yet believe it; it would be too fortunate. No." Then, rising suddenly, she said to the Chouette, who was gazing at her with the utmost astonishment, "Follow me." And Sarah walked before her with hasty steps. At the end of the alley she ascended several steps that led by a glass door to a small room sumptuously furnished. At the moment when the Chouette was about to enter, Sarah made a sign to her to remain outside, and then rang the bell violently. A servant appeared. "I am not at home to anybody, and let no one enter here, no one, do you hear?" The servant bowed and retired. Sarah, for the sake of greater security, pushed the bolt. The Chouette heard the order given to the servant, and saw Sarah fasten the bolt. The countess then, turning towards her, said, "Come in quickly, and shut the door." The Chouette did as she was bidden. Hastily opening a secrétaire,
Sarah took from it an ebony coffer, which she placed on a writing table in the centre of the room, and beckoned the Chouette towards her. The coffer was filled with small caskets lying one upon the other, and containing splendid jewellery. Sarah was in so much haste to arrive at the bottom of the coffer, that she hastily scattered over the table these jewel cases, splendidly filled with necklaces, bracelets, tiaras of rubies, emeralds, and diamonds, which sparkled with 1,000 fires. The Chouette was dazzled. She was armed, was alone with the countess. Escape was easy, certain. An infernal idea shot through the brain of this monster. But to put this new crime into execution it was necessary to extricate her stiletto from her basket, and approach Sarah without exciting her suspicions. With the craft of the tiger cat who grovels along treacherously towards its prey, the beldame profited by the countess's preoccupation to move imperceptibly around the table which separated her from her victim. The Chouette had already begun her perfidious movement, when she was compelled suddenly to stop short. Sarah took a locket from the bottom of the box, leaned over the table, and, handing it to the Chouette with a trembling hand, said, "Look at this portrait." "It is Pegriotte!" exclaimed the Chouette, struck with the strong resemblance. "It is the little girl who was handed to me. I think I see her just as she was when Tournemine brought her to me. That's just like her long curling hair, which I cut off and sold directly, ma foi." "You recognise her? It is really she? Oh, I conjure you, do not deceive me! Do not deceive me!" "I tell you, my good lady, it is Pegriotte, as if I saw herself there," said the Chouette, trying to draw nearer to Sarah without being remarked. "And even now she is very like this portrait. If you saw her you would be struck by the likeness." Sarah had not uttered one cry of pain or alarm when she learned that her daughter had been for 10 years leading a wretched existence, forsaken as she was. Not one feeling of remorse was there when she reflected that she herself had snatched her away disastrously from the peaceful retreat in which Rodolph had placed her. This unnatural mother did not eagerly question the Chouette with terrible anxiety as to the past life of the child. No. In her heart ambition had long since stifled every sentiment of maternal tenderness. It was not joy at again being restored to a lost daughter that transported her. It was the hope of seeing at length realised the vain dream of her whole existence. Rodolph had felt deeply interested in this unfortunate girl, had protected her without knowing her. What would then be his feelings when he discovered that she was his daughter? He was free. The countess was a widow. Sarah already saw the sovereign crown sparkling on her brow. The Chouette, still stealing on with slow steps, had at length reached one end of the table, and had her stiletto perpendicularly in her basket, its handle on a level with the opening and within her clutch. She was but a step or two from the countess. "Do you know how to write?" inquired Sarah of her, and pushing from her the casket and gems, she opened a blotting book which was by an inkstand. "No, madame, I do not," replied the Chouette, at all risks. "I will write, then, at your dictation. Tell me all the circumstances of the abandonment of this little girl." And Sarah, sitting in an armchair before the writing table, took up a pen and made a sign to the Chouette to come close to her. The old wretch's one eye sparkled. At last she was standing up, close to the seat on which Sarah was sitting, and, stooping over a table, was preparing to write. "I will read aloud, and then," said the countess, "you can correct any mistakes." "Yes, madame," replied the Chouette, narrowly watching every motion of Sarah; and she furtively introduced her hand into her basket that she might be able to grasp the poniard without being observed. The countess commenced writing. "I declare that—" Then, interrupting herself, and turning towards the Chouette, who was at that moment touching the handle of her poniard, Sarah added, "At what period was the child brought to you?" "In the month of February, 1827." "And by whom?" continued Sarah, turning towards the Chouette. "By Pierre Tournemine, now at the galleys at Rochefort. It was Madame Séraphin, the notary's housekeeper, who brought the young girl to him." The countess continued writing, and then read aloud: I declare that in the month of February, 1827, a person named—" The Chouette had drawn the poniard; already had she raised her arm to strike her victim between the shoulders. Sarah turned again. The Chouette, that she might not be off her guard, leaned her right hand, armed as it was, on the back of Sarah's armchair, and then stooped towards her, as if in attitude to reply to her question. "Tell me again the name of the man who handed the child to you," said the countess. "Pierre Tournemine," repeated Sarah, as she wrote it down, "at this time at the galleys of Rochefort, brought me a child, which had been confided to him by the housekeeper of—" The countess could not finish. The Chouette, having got rid of her basket by allowing it to slide from her arm on to the floor, threw herself on the countess with equal fury and rapidity; and, having grasped the back of her neck with her left hand, forced her face down on the table, and then with her right hand drove the stiletto in between her two shoulders. This atrocious assassination was so promptly effected that the countess did not utter a cry, a moan. Still sitting, she remained with her head and the front of her body on the table. Her pen fell from her fingers. "Just the very blow which Fourline gave the little old man in the Rue du Roule," said the monster. "One more who will never wag tongue again, her account is settled." And the Chouette, gathering up the jewels together, huddled them into her basket, not perceiving that her victim still breathed. The murder and robbery effected, the horrid old devil opened the glass door, ran swiftly along the tree-covered path, went out by the small side door, and reached the lone tract of ground. Near the observatory she took a hackney coach, which drove her to Bras Rouge's in the Champs Elysées. The widow Martial, Nicholas, Calabash, and Barbillon had, as we know, an appointment with the Chouette in this den of infamy, in order to rob and murder the diamond matcher. CHAPTR XIX. Read by Celine Major. CHAPTER XIX of the Mysteries of Paris, Volume 4, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Agent of Safety. The reader already knows the Bleeding Heart in the Champs Elysées, near the Cour de la Reine, in one of the deep ditches which, a few years since, were close to this promenade. The inhabitants of the Ile du Ravageur had not yet arrived. After the departure of Bradamanti, who had, as we know, accompanied Madame d'Harville's stepmother into Normandy, Tortillard had returned to his father. Placed as a sentinel at the top of the staircase, the little cripple was to announce the arrival of the Martials by a certain cry, Bras Rouge being at this moment in secret conference with an agent de sûreté named Narcisse Borel, whom the reader may perchance remember to have seen at the tapis franc of the ogress, when he came there to arrest two miscreants accused of murder. This agent, a man about 40 years of age, was thick-set and powerful, with a high colour, a keen, quick eye, his face entirely shaven, in order that he might better assume the various disguises necessary for his dangerous expeditions; for it was frequently necessary for him to unite the transformations of the actor to the courage and energy of the soldier, in order to seize on certain ruffians with whom he had to contend in cunning and determination. Narcisse Borel was, in a word, one of the most useful and most active instruments of that providence on a small scale which is modestly and commonly termed the police. We will return to the conversation between Narcisse Borel and Bras Rouge, which appeared to be very animated. "Yes," said the agent of safety, "you are accused of profiting by your double-faced position, and of taking with impunity a share in the booty of a band of most dangerous malefactors, and then giving false information respecting them to the protective police. Take care, Bras Rouge, for if you are detected no mercy will be shown to you."
"Alas! I know I am accused of this, and it is very distressing for me, my good Monsieur Narcisse," replied Bras Rouge, whilst his weasel's face assumed a hypocritical air of vexation. "But I hope that this day will at last do me justice, and my good faith will be recognised." "That remains to be proved." "How can I be distrusted? Have I not given proofs? Was it I or was it not who at the time enabled you to apprehend Ambroise Martial, one of the most dangerous malefactors in Paris, in the very fact?" "All this is very fine and good, but Ambroise was warned they were going to arrest him, and if I had not been earlier than the hour you told me of, he would have escaped." Do you think me capable, M. Narcisse, of having secretly told him of your coming?"
"I only know that I received from the scoundrel a pistol shot aimed full at me, but which fortunately only grazed my arm."
"Why, to be sure, M. Narcisse, in your profession you must be occasionally exposed to such mistakes."
"Ah, you call these mistakes, eh?"
"Certainly; for no doubt the wicked fellow intended to lodge the ball in your body."
"In the arm, body, or head, no matter, I don't complain of that. Every profession has its disagreeables."
"And its pleasures, too, M. Narcisse, and its pleasures. For instance, when a man as cunning, as skilful, and as courageous as you has been for a long time on the track of a gang of villains, whom he follows from quarter to quarter, from lurking place to lurking place, with a good bloodhound like your poor servant to command, Bras Rouge, and finally marks them down and comes upon them in a trap from which not one of them can escape, why, then, you must say, M. Narcisse, that there is great pleasure in it, the joy of a sportsman, not including the service he renders to justice," added the host of the Bleeding Heart, with a grave air.
"I should fully agree with you if the bloodhound were faithful, but I fear it is not."
"Ah, M. Narcisse, you think "
"I think that, instead of putting us on the track, you amuse yourself with setting us on a false scent, and abuse the confidence placed in you. Every day you promise to aid us to lay hands on the gang, and that day never arrives."
"What if the day arrives to day, M. Narcisse, as I am sure it will? What if I bring together in a parcel Barbillon, Nicholas Martial, the widow, her daughter, and the Chouette? Will that, or will it not be a good sweep of the net? Will you then mistrust me any longer?"
"No, and you will have rendered a real service; for there are very strong presumptive facts against this gang, suspicions almost assured, but unfortunately no proofs.
So, then, a small fag end of actual crime, which would allow of their being apprehended, would help amazingly to unravel the difficult skein, eh, M. Narcisse?"
"Most decidedly. And you assure me that there has not been the slightest incitement on your part towards the coup which they are now going to attempt?"
"No, on my honour. It is the Chouette who came to me to propose inveigling the diamond matcher here when that infernal hag learned from my son that Morel the lapidary who lives in the Rue du Temple was a workman in real stones and not in false, and that Mother Mathieu had frequently considerable value about her person. I acceded to the proposition, and suggested to the Chouette that the Martial and Barbillon should join her, so that I might be able to put the whole party into your hands."
"And the Schoolmaster, that fellow who is so dangerous, so powerful, and so ferocious, and who was always with the Chouette, one of the frequenters of the tapis franc?"
"The Schoolmaster?" said Bras Rouge, feigning astonishment.
"Yes, a convict escaped from the galleys at Rochefort, Anselm Duranel by name, sentenced for life. We know now that he disfigured himself on purpose, that he might not be recognised. Have you no trace of him?"
"None," replied Bras Rouge, boldly,
for he had his reasons for the lie, the Schoolmaster being at this very moment shut up in one of the cellars of the cabaret. "There is every reason to believe that the Schoolmaster is the author of fresh murders. He would be an important capture."
"No one knows what has become of him for the last 6 weeks."
"And that's the reason you are reproached with having lost all trace of him?"
"Always reproaches, M. Narcisse, always."
"Not for want of ample cause. And how goes on the smuggling?"
"Is it not necessary that I should know something of all kinds of persons, smugglers as well as others, in order to put you on the scent? I disclosed to you that pipe to introduce liquids, established outside the Barrière du Trône, and coming into a house in the street."
"I know that," said Narcisse, interrupting Bras Rouge; "but for one that you denounce you allow 10 to escape, and continue your traffic with impunity. I am sure you eat at 2 mangers, as the saying is."
"Oh, M. Narcisse, I am incapable of an appetite so dishonest."
"That is not all. In the Rue du Temple, No. 17, there lives a woman named Burette, who lends money on deposit, who, they say, is a private receiver of stolen goods on your account."
"What would you have me do, M. Narcisse? The world is so slanderous, says so many wicked things. Once again I say it is necessary for me to mix with as many rogues as possible, that I even seem one of themselves, so much the worse for them, in order that they may not have any suspicions. But it cuts me to the heart to imitate them, cuts me to the heart. I must, indeed, be devoted to the service, to give myself up to such things as that. Poor dear man, I pity you with all my soul. You are laughing at me, M. Narcisse; but if that was believed, why has there not been a search made at Mother Burette's and in my house? You know well enough that we might not alarm the ruffians, whom for so long a time you have promised to deliver into our hands. And I am now about to deliver them, M. Narcisse. Before an hour you will have them all handcuffed, and that without much trouble, for there are 3 women. As to Barbillon and Nicolas Martial, they are as savage as tigers, but as cowardly as pullets." "Tigers or pullets," said Narcisse, half opening his long frock coat, and showing the butts of 2 pistols in the pockets of his trousers, "I have wherewithal here for them. You will do well to have 2 of your men with you, M. Narcisse. When they see themselves caught, the most cowardly sometimes show fight." "I shall station 2 of my men in the small parlour at the entrance, by the side of the room into which you are to introduce the jewel matcher. At the first cry, I shall appear at one door, and my 2 men at the other." "You must be speedy, then, for I expect the gang here every moment, M. Narcisse." "Very well, I will go at once and place my men, provided that all this is not another humbug." The conversation was cut short by the peculiar whistle intended as a signal. Bras Rouge looked out of a window to see whom it was that Tortillard announced. "Aha! It is the Chouette already. Well, do you believe me now, M. Narcisse?" "Why, this looks something like But it is not all. But we shall see. And now to station my men." And the agent of safety disappeared at a side door. CHAPTer 19. Read by Celine Major. Chapter 20 of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 4, by Eugène Sue. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Chouette. The precipitation of the Chouette's step, the fierce throbbings of a fever of rapine and murder which still animated her, had suffused her hideous features with a deep purple, whilst her green eyes sparkled with savage joy. Tortillard followed her, hopping and skipping. At the moment when she descended the last steps of the stairs, Bras Rouge's son, from pure mischief, put his foot on the long and dragging skirts of the Chouette's gown. This sudden stoppage made the old woman stumble, and, unable to catch hold of the baluster, she fell on her knees, her 2 hands extended, and, dropping her precious basket, whence escaped a gold bracelet set with emeralds and pearls. The Chouette, having in her fall somewhat excoriated her fingers, picked up the bracelet, which had not escaped the keen sight of Tortillard, and, recovering her feet, turned furiously to the little cripple, who approached her with a hypocritical air, saying to her, "Oh, dear me! Did your foot slip?" Without making any reply, the Chouette seized Tortillard by the hair, and, stooping to a level with his cheek, she bit it with such fury that the blood spurted out beneath her teeth. Strange, however, Tortillard, in spite of his usual vindictiveness, in spite of feeling such intense pain, did not utter a murmur or a cry. He only wiped his bleeding cheek, and said, with a forced laugh, "I hope next time you will not kiss me so hard, La Chouette?" "Wicked little brat! Why did you tread on my gown on purpose to make me fall?" "Me? Oh, how could you think so? I swear I didn't do it on purpose, my dear Chouette. Don't think your little Tortillard would do you any harm. He loves you too well for that. You should never beat him, or scold him, or bite him, for he is as fond of you as if he were a poor little dog, and you were his mistress," said the boy, in a gentle and insinuating tone. Deceived by Tortillard's hypocrisy, the Chouette believed him, and replied, "Well, well, if I was wrong to bite you, why, let it go for all the other times you have deserved it, you little villain. But vive la joie! To day I bear no malice. Where is your old rogue of a father?" "In the house. Shall I go and find him for you?" "No. Are the Martials here?" "Not yet. Then I have time to go down and visit Fourline. I want to speak to old No Eyes." "Will you go into the Schoolmaster's cellar?" inquired Tortillard, scarcely concealing his diabolical delight. "What's that to you?" "To me?" "Yes, you asked me the question with such an odd air." "Because I was thinking of something odd." "What?" "Why, that you ought, at least, to have brought him a pack of cards to pass away his time," replied Tortillard, with a cunning look. "That would divert him a little. Now he has nothing to play at but not to be bitten by the rats, and he always wins at that game, and after a while it becomes tiresome." The Chouette laughed heartily at Tortillard's wit, and said to the cripple, "Love of a baby boy to his mammy! I do not know any chap who has more vice than this scamp. Go and get me a candle, that you might light me down to see Fourline, and you can help me to open his door. You know that I can hardly push it by myself." "Well, no, it is so very dark in the cellar," said Tortillard, shaking his head. "What? You who are wicked as devil to be a coward? I like to see that, indeed. Go directly and tell your father that I shall be with him almost immediately, that I am with Fourline, and that we are talking of putting up the banns for our marriage. He, he, he!" added the disgusting wretch, grinning. "So make haste, and you shall be bridesman, and if you are a good boy, you shall have my garter." Tortillard went, with a sulky air, to fetch a light. Whilst she was waiting for him, the Chouette, perfectly intoxicated with the success of her robbery, put her hand into her basket to feel the precious jewels it enclosed. It was for the purpose of temporarily concealing this treasure that she desired to descend into the Schoolmaster's cellar, and not, according to her habit, to enjoy the torments of her new victim. We will presently explain why, with Bras Rouge's connivance, the Chouette had immured the Schoolmaster in the very subterranean cave into which this miscreant had formerly precipitated Rodolph. Tortillard, holding a light, now appeared at the door of the cabaret. The Chouette followed him into the lower room, in which opened the trap with the folding doors, with which we are already acquainted. Bras Rouge's son, sheltering the light in the hollow of his hand, and preceding the old woman, slowly descended a stone staircase, which led to a sharp declivity, at the end of which was the thick door of the cellar which had so nearly proved Rodolph's grave. When he reached the bottom of the staircase, Tortillard pretended to hesitate in following the Chouette. "Well, now, you little vagabond, go on," she said. "Why, it is so dark, and you go so fast, Chouette; and, indeed, I'd rather go back again, and leave you the light." "And then, foolish imp, how am I to open the cellar door by myself? Will you come on?" "No, I am so frightened." "If I begin with you, mind! If you threaten me, I'll go back again," and Tortillard retreated several paces. "Well, listen to me now, be a good boy," said the Chouette, repressing her anger, "and I'll give you something." "Well, what?" said Tortillard, coming up to her. "Speak to me so always, and I'll do anything you wish me, Mother Chouette." "Come, I'm in a hurry." "Yes, but promise me that I may have some fun with the Schoolmaster." "Another time. I haven't time to day." "Only a little bit. Just let me tease him for 5 minutes." "Another time. I tell you that I want to return up stairs as quickly as possible." "Why, then, do you want to open the door of his apartment?" "That's no affair of yours. Come now, have done with this. Perhaps the Martials are come by this time, and I must have some talk with them. So be a good boy, and you sha'n't be sorry for it. Come along." "I must love you very much, Chouette, for you make me do just what you like," said Tortillard, slowly advancing. The dim, wavering light of the candle, which but imperfectly lighted this gloomy way, reflected the black profile of this hideous brat on the slimy walls, which were full of crevices and reeking with damp. At the end of this passage, through the half obscurity, might be seen the low and crumbling arch of the entrance to the cellar, the thick door strengthened with iron bars, and, standing out in the shade, the red shawl and white cap of the Chouette. By the united exertions of the two, the door opened harshly on its rusty hinges. A puff of humid vapour escaped from this den, as dark as midnight. The light placed on the ground threw its faint beams on the first steps of the stone staircase,
the bottom of which was completely lost in the darkness. A cry, or rather a savage roar, came from the depths of the cave.
"Ah, there's Fourline wishing his mamma good morning,"
said the Chouette, with a sneer; and she descended several steps in order to conceal her basket in some hole.
"I'm hungry!" exclaimed the Schoolmaster, in a voice that shook with rage. "Do you wish to kill me like a mad dog?" "What's the deary lovey hungry?" said the Chouette, with a laugh of mockery. "Then smell its thumb."
There was a sound like that of a chain twisted violently, then a groan of mute, repressed passion.
Take care, or you'll have a bump in your leg, as you had at Bouqueval farm, poor dear pa," said Tortillard. "He's right, the boy is. Keep yourself quiet, Fourline," continued the hag. "The ring and chain are solid, old No Eyes, for they came from Father Micou's, and he sells nothing but the best goods. It is your fault, too. Why did you allow yourself to be bound whilst you were asleep? We only had then to put the ring and chain in this place, and bring you down here in the cool to preserve you, old darling." "That's a pity; he'll grow mouldy," said Tortillard. Again the clank of the chain was heard. He, Fourline! Why, he's dancing like a cockchafer tied by the claw," said the belle dame. "I think I see him." "Cockchafer, cockchafer, fly away home, fly, fly, fly. Your husband is the Schoolmaster,"
sung Tortillard. This increased the Chouette's hilarity. Having deposited her basket in a hole formed by the lowering of the wall at the staircase, she stood erect, and said, "You see, Fourline."
"He don't see," said Tortillard. "The brat's right. Will you hear, Fourline? There was no occasion, when we came away from the farm, to be such a booby as to turn compassionate, and prevent me from marking Pegriotte's face with my vitriol; and then, too, you talked of your conscience, which was getting troubled. I saw you were growing lily-livered, and meant to come to the honest dodge, and so some of these odd come shortlies, you would have turned nose (informer), and have made a meal of us, old No Eyes, and then " "Then old No Eyes will make a meal of you, for he is hungry, Chouette," said Tortillard, suddenly, and with all his strength, pushing the old woman by her back. The Chouette fell forward with a horrible imprecation. She might have been distinctly heard as she rolled from the top to the bottom of the staircase. "Bump, bump, bump, bump! There's the Chouette for you! There she is! Why don't you jump upon her, old buffer?" added Tortillard.
Then, seizing the basket from under the stone where he had seen the old woman place it, he scampered up the stairs, exclaiming, with a shout of savage joy,
"Here's a pull worth more than that you had before, eh, Chouette? This time you won't bite me till the blood comes, eh? Ah, you thought I bore no spite, much obliged, my cheek bleeds still."
"Oh, I have her!" cried the Schoolmaster from the depth of the cave.
"If you have her, old lad, I cry snacks,"
said Tortillard, with a laugh; and he stopped on the top step of the stairs.
"Help!"
shrieked the Chouette, in a strangling voice.
"Thanks, Tortillard," said the Schoolmaster, "thanks; and to reward you, you shall hear the night bird, Chouette, shriek. Listen, boy, listen to the bird of death." "Bravo! Here I am in the dress boxes," said Tortillard, seating himself on the top of the stairs. As he said this, he raised the light to endeavour to see the fearful scene which was going on in the depths of the cavern; but the darkness was too thick, so faint a light could not disperse it. Bras Rouge's son could not see anything. The struggle with the Schoolmaster and the Chouette was mute, deadly, without a word, without a cry. Only from time to time was heard the hard breathing or the stifled groan, which always accompanies violent and desperate efforts. Tortillard, seated on the step, began to stamp his feet with that cadence peculiar to an audience impatient to see the beginning of a play. Then he uttered the cries so familiar to the frequenters of the gallery of the minor theatres: "Music! Music! Play up! Up with the curtain!" "Oh, now I have hold of you as I desired," murmured the Schoolmaster from the recess of the cellar, "and you were going " A desperate movement of the Chouette interrupted him. She struggled with all the energy which the fear of death inspires. "Louder! Can't hear!" bawled Tortillard. "It is in vain you try to gnaw my hand. I will hold you as I like," said the Schoolmaster. Then, having no doubt succeeded in keeping the Chouette down, he added, "That's it. Now listen." "Tortillard, call your father!" shrieked the Chouette, with a faltering, exhausted voice. "Help! Help!" "Turn her out, the old thing! She won't let us hear," said the little cripple, with a shout of laughter. "Put her out!" The Chouette's cries were not audible from this cavern, low as it was. The wretched creature, seeing that there was no chance of help from Bras Rouge's son, resolved to try a last effort. "Tortillard, go and fetch help, and I will give you my basket. It is full of jewels. There it is, under a stone." "How generous! Thank you, madame. Why haven't I got it already? Hark! Don't you hear how it rattles?" said Tortillard, shaking it. "But now, if you'll give us a half-pound of gingerbread nuts, I'll go and fetch pa." "Have pity on me, and I will " The Chouette was unable to conclude. Again there was a profound silence. The little cripple again began to beat time on the stone staircase on which he was seated, accompanying the noise of his feet with the repeated cry, "Why don't you begin? Up with the curtain! Music! Music!" "In this way, Chouette, you can no longer disturb me with your cries," said the Schoolmaster, after a few minutes, during which he had, no doubt, gagged the old woman. "You know very well," he continued, in a slow, hollow voice, "that I do not wish to end this all at once. Torture for torture! You have made me suffer enough, and I must speak at length to you before I kill you. Yes, at length. It will be very terrible for you, agonising." "Come, no stuff and nonsense, old parson," said Tortillard, raising himself half up from his seat. "Punish her, but don't do her any harm. You say you'll kill her; that's only a hum. I am very fond of my Chouette. I have only lent her to you, and you must give her back again. Don't spoil her. I won't have my Chouette spoiled. If you do, I'll go and fetch pa." "Be quiet, and she shall only have what she deserves, a profitable lesson," said the Schoolmaster, in order to assure Tortillard, and for fear the cripple should go and fetch assistance. "All right! Bravo! Now the play's going to begin," said Bras Rouge's son, who did not seriously believe that the Schoolmaster intended to kill the Chouette. "Let us discourse a little, Chouette," continued the Schoolmaster, in a calm voice. "In the first place, you see, since that dream at the Bouqueval farm, which brought all my crimes before my eyes, since that dream which did all but drive me mad, which will drive me mad, for in my solitude, in the deep isolation in which I live, all my thoughts dwell on this dream, in spite of myself. A strange change has come over me. Yes, I have a horror of my past ferocity. In the first place, I would not allow you to make a martyr of La Goualeuse, though that was nothing. Chaining me here in the cellar, making me suffer from cold and hunger, and detaining me for your wicked suggestions, you have left me to all the fear of my own reflections. Oh, you do not know what it is to be left alone, always alone, with a dark veil over your eyes, as the pitiless man said who punished me. Oh, it is horrid! It was in this very cavern that I flung him in order to kill him. And this cavern is the place of my punishment, it may be my grave. I repeat that this is horrid. All that man predicted to me has come to pass. He said to me, 'You have abused your strength; you will be the plaything, the sport of the most weak.' And it has been so. He said to me, 'Henceforward separated from the exterior world, face to face with the eternal remembrance of your crimes, one day you will repent those crimes.' and that day has come. The loneliness has purified me. I could not have believed it possible. Another proof that I am, perhaps, less wicked than formerly, is that I feel inexpressible joy in holding you here, monster! Not to avenge myself, but to avenge your victims. Yes, I shall have accomplished a duty when, with my own hands, I shall have punished my accomplice. A voice says to me, that if you had fallen into my power earlier, much blood would have been spared. I have now a horror of my past murders, and yet, is it not strange? It is without fear, it is even with security, that I am now about to perpetrate on you a fearful murder, with most fearful refinements. Say, do you understand that?" "Bravo! Well played, old No-Eyes! He gets on!" exclaimed Tortillard, applauding. "It is really something to laugh at." "To laugh at!" continued the Schoolmaster, in a hollow voice. "Keep still, Chouette. I must complete my explanation as to how I gradually came to repentance. This revelation will be hateful to you, heart of stone, and will prove to you also how remorseless I ought to be in the vengeance which I should wreak on you in the name of our victims. I must be quick. My delight at grasping you thus makes my blood throb in my veins. My temples beat with violence just as when, by thinking of my dream, my reason wanders. Perhaps one of my crises will come on, but I shall have time to make the approaches of death frightful to you by compelling you to hear me." "At him, Chouette!" cried Tortillard. "At him, and reply boldly. Why, you don't know your part? Tell the old one to prompt you, my worthy elderly damsel." "It is useless for you to struggle and bite me," said the Schoolmaster, after another pause. "You shall not escape me. You have bitten my fingers to the bone, but I will pull your tongue out if you stir. Let us continue our discourse. When I have been alone in the night and silence, I have begun to experience fits of furious, impotent rage; and for the first time my senses wandered. And though I was awake, I again dreamed the dream, you know, the dream. The little old man in the Rue du Roule, the drowned woman, the cattle dealer, and you, soaring over these phantoms. I tell you it was horrible. I am blind, and my thoughts assume a form, a body, in order to represent to me incessantly, and in a visible, palpable manner, the features of my victims. I should not have dreamed this fearful vision had not my mind, continually absorbed by the remembrance of my past crimes, been troubled with the same fantasies. Unquestionably, when one is deprived of sight, the ideas that beset us form themselves into images in the brain. Yet, sometimes, by dint of viewing them with resigned terror, it would appear that these menacing spectres have pity on me. They grow dim, fade away, vanish. Then I feel myself awakened from my horrid dream, but so weak, cast down, prostrated, that, would you believe it? Ah, how you will laugh, Chouette! That I weep. Do you hear? I weep. You don't laugh. Laugh, 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 I say!" The Chouette gave a dull and stifled groan. "Louder!" said Tortillard. "Can't hear." "Yes," continued the Schoolmaster, "I weep, for I suffer and rage in vain. I say to myself, to morrow, next day, for ever, I shall be a prey to the same attacks of delirium and gloomy desolation. What a life! Oh, what a life! And I would not choose death rather than be buried alive in this abyss which incessantly pervades my thoughts. Blind, alone, and a prisoner, what can relieve me from my remorse? Nothing, nothing. When the fantasies disappear for a moment, and do not pass and repass the black veil constantly before my eyes, there are other tortures, other overwhelming reflections. I say to myself, if I had remained an honest man, I should be at this moment free, tranquil, happy, beloved, and honoured by my connections, instead of being blind and chained in this dungeon at the mercy of my accomplices. Alas! The regret of happiness lost from crime is the first step towards repentance, and when to repentance is joined an expiation of fearful severity, an expiation which changes life into a long, sleepless night, filled with avenging hallucinations or despairing reflections, perhaps then man's pardon succeeds to remorse and expiation. "I say, old chap," exclaimed Tortillard, "you are borrowing a bit from M. Moissard's part. Come, no cribbing, gammon." The Schoolmaster did not hear Bras Rouge's son. "You are astonished to hear me speak thus, Chouette. If I had continued to imbrue myself either in bloody crimes or the fierce drunkenness of the life of the galleys, this salutary change would never have come over me, I know full well. But alone, blind, stung with remorse, which eats into me, of what else could I think? Of new crimes, how to commit them? Escape, how to escape? And if I escaped, whither should I go? What should I do with my liberty? No, I must henceforth live in eternal night, between the anguish of repentance and the fear of formidable apparitions which pursue me. Sometimes, however, a faint ray of hope comes to lighten the depths of my darkness, a moment of calm succeeds to my torments. Yes, for sometimes I am able to drive away the spectres which beset me by opposing to them the recollections of an honest and peaceful past, by ascending in thought to my youthful days, to my hours of infancy. Happily, the greatest wretches have, at least, some years of peace and innocence to oppose to their criminal and blood-stained years. None are born wicked. The most infamous have had the lovely candour of infancy, have tasted the sweet joys of that delightful age. And thus I again say, I sometimes find a bitter consolation in saying to myself, I am at this hour doomed to universal execration, but there was a time when I was beloved, protected, because I was inoffensive and good. Alas! I must indeed take refuge in the past, when I can, for it is there only that I can find calm." As he uttered these last words, the tones of the Schoolmaster lost their harshness. This man of iron appeared deeply moved, and he added, "But now the salutary influence of these thoughts is such that my fury is appeased. Courage, power will fail me to punish you. No, it is not I who will shed your blood."
"Well said, old buck! So you see, Chouette, it was only a lark!" cried Tortillard, applauding.
"No, it is not I who will shed your blood," continued the Schoolmaster. "It would be a murder, excusable, perhaps, but still a murder; and I have enough with 3 spectres; and then, who knows, perhaps one day you will repent also?" And as he spake thus, the Schoolmaster had mechanically given the Chouette some liberty of movement. She took advantage of it to seize the stiletto which he had thrust into her stays after Sarah's murder, and aimed a violent blow with this weapon at the ruffian, in order to disengage herself from him. He uttered a cry of extreme pain. The ferocity of his hatred, his vengeance, his rage, his bloody instincts, suddenly aroused and exasperated by this attack, now all burst forth, suddenly, terribly, and carried with it his reason, already so strongly shaken by so many shocks. "Ah, viper, I feel your teeth!" he exclaimed in a voice that shook with passion, and seizing with all his might the Chouette, who had thought thus to escape him. "You are in this dungeon, then?" he added with an air of madness; "but I will crush the viper or screech owl. No doubt you were waiting for the coming of the phantoms. Yes, for the blood beats in my temples, my ears ring, my head turns, as when they are about to appear. Yes, I was not deceived, here they are, they advance from the depths of darkness, they advance! How pale they are, and their blood, how it flows, red and smoking! It frightens you, you struggle. Well, be still, you shall not see the phantoms. No,
You shall not see them. I have pity on you. I will make you blind. You shall be like me, eyeless."
Here the Schoolmaster paused. The Chouette uttered a cry so horrible that Tortillard, alarmed, bounded off the step and stood up. The horrid shrieks of the Chouette served to place the copestone on the fury of the Schoolmaster. "Sing," he said in a low voice. "Sing, Chouette, night bird. Sing your song of death. You are happy. You do not see 3 phantoms of those we have assassinated: the little old man in the Rue du Roule, the drowned woman, the cattle dealer. I see them. They approach. They touch me. Ah, so cold! So cold! Ah!" The last gleam of sense of this unhappy wretch was lost in this cry of condemnation. He could no longer reason, but acted and roared like a wild beast, and only obeyed the savage instinct of destruction for destruction. A hurried trampling was now heard, interrupted frequently at intervals with a heavy sound, which appeared like a box of bones bounding against a stone, upon which it was intended to be broken. Sharp, convulsive shrieks and a burst of hellish laughter accompanied each of these blows. Then there was a gasp of agony, then nothing. Suddenly a distant noise of steps and voices reached the depths of the subterranean vault. Tortillard, frozen with terror by the fearful scene at which he had been present without seeing it, perceived several persons holding lights who descended the staircase rapidly. In a moment the cave was full of agents of safety, led by Narcisse Borel. The municipal guards followed. Tortillard was seized on the first steps of the cellar, with the Chouette's basket still in his hand. Narcisse Borel, with some of his men, descended into the Schoolmaster's cavern. They all paused, struck by the appalling sight. Chained by the leg to an enormous stone placed in the middle of the cave, the Schoolmaster, with his hair on end, his long beard, foaming mouth, was moving like a wild beast about his den, drawing after him by the 2 legs the dead carcass of the Chouette, whose head was horribly fractured. It required desperate exertions to snatch her from his grasp and manacle him. After a determined resistance, they at length conveyed him into the low parlour of the cabaret, a large dark room lighted by a solitary window. There, handcuffed and guarded, were Barbillon, Nicholas Martial, his mother and sister. They had been apprehended at the very moment when laying violent hands on the jewel matcher to cut her throat. She was recovering herself in another room. Stretched on the ground, and hardly restrained by 2 men, the Schoolmaster, slightly wounded, but quite deranged, was roaring like a wild bull. Barbillon, with his head hanging down, his face ghastly, lead-coloured, his lips colourless, eye fixed and savage, his long and straight hair falling on the collar of his blouse, torn in the struggle, was seated on a bench, his wrist, enclosed in handcuffs, resting on his knees. The juvenile appearance of this fellow, he was scarcely 18 years of age, the regularity of his beardless features, already emaciated and withered, were rendered still more deplorable by the hideous stamp which debauchery and crime had imprinted on his physiognomy. Impassive, he did not say a word. It could not be determined whether his apparent insensibility was owing to stupor or to a calm energy. His breathing was rapid, and at times he wiped away the perspiration from his pale brow with his fettered hands. By his side was Calabash, whose cap had been torn off, and her yellowish hair, tied behind with a piece of tape, hung down in several scanty and tangled meshes. More savage than subdued, her thin and bilious cheeks were somewhat suffused as she looked disdainfully at her brother Nicholas, who was in a chair in front of her. Anticipating the fate that awaited him, this scoundrel was dejected. With drooping head and trembling knees he was overcome with fright. His teeth chattered convulsively, and he heaved heavy groans. The mother Martial, the only one unmoved, exhibited every proof that she had lost nothing of her accustomed audacity. With head erect, she looked unshrinkingly around her. However, at the sight of Bras Rouge, whom they brought into the low room after having made him accompany the commissary and his clerk in the minute search they had made all over the place, the widow's features contracted in spite of herself, and her small and usually dull eyes lighted up like those of an infuriated viper, her pinched up lips became livid, and she twisted her manacled arms. Then, as if sorry she had made this mute display of impotent rage, she subdued her emotion, and became cold and calm again. Whilst the commissary and his clerk were writing their depositions, Narcisse Borel, rubbing his hands, cast a satisfied look on the important capture he had made, and which freed Paris from a band of dangerous criminals. But, confessing to himself how useful Bras Rouge had really been in the affair, he could not help casting on him an expressive and grateful look. Tortillard's father was to share until after the trial the confinement and lot of those he had informed against, and, like them, he was handcuffed; and even more than them did he assume a trembling air of consternation, twisting his weasel's features with all his might, in order to give them a despairing expression, and heaving tremendous sighs. He embraced Tortillard as if he should find some consolation in his paternal caresses. The little cripple did not seem much moved by these marks of tenderness. He had just learned that, for a time, he would be moved off to the prison for young offenders.
"What a misery to have a dear child!" cried Bras Rouge, pretending to be greatly affected. "It is we, too, who are most unfortunate, madame, for we shall be separated from our children."
The widow could no longer preserve her calmness, and, having no doubt of Bras Rouge's treachery, which she had foretold, she exclaimed,
"I was sure it was you who had sold my son at Toulon. There, Judas!" and she spat in his face. "You sell our heads! Well, they shall see the right sort of deaths of true Martials."
"Yes, we shan't shrink before the carline (guillotine)," added Calabash, with savage excitement.
The widow, glancing towards Nicholas, said to her daughter, with an air of unutterable contempt,
"That coward there will dishonour us on the scaffold."
Some minutes afterwards, the widow and Calabash, accompanied by 2 policemen, got into a hackney coach to go to St. Lazare. Barbillon, Nicholas, and Bras Rouge were conveyed to La Force, whilst the Schoolmaster was conveyed to the Conciergerie, where there are cells for the reception of lunatics. End of Chapter 20. End of The Mysteries of Paris, Volume 4, by Eugène Sue. Recorded by Celine Major.